It's important how you get your ideas of nature right, because you can think of the world any way you want. It could be a giant toadstool. It could be a war, or we can go for more literal metaphors. That it's mathematical, that it's whatever. And the two main realms of epistemology are subjective and materialist epistemology. Often the materialist epistemology is associated with objectivism and objectivity. Okay, so the thing is, I am a subjectivist, okay, but I believe in materialism, and I believe in that materialistic model. I interpret the world through that materialistic model quite regularly. So how can I do that? How can I be a subjectivist, but then again, I say the truth comes from the material world? Well, it depends on how you define materialism. This is like math. Language is like math. We get to make our own formula and try them out, see how they work. So the test for me, and we'll talk about if it's possible in a second, but the test for me, if I want to be a subjective materialist, is to come up with a subjective definition of material. A subjective definition of material would be one that could be judged correct or incorrect based on subjective means. And the reason I would want that is because since we only have subjective means, it would be nice to start from subjective means. And when people define material as external substance, which exists independent of the observer, something like this, then there's a problem because you can never actually establish that objective fact of its externality. All you get is internal perceptions of it. So people like to think that it's impossible to make any non-objectivist definition of material. That's wed. Those ideas are wedded. But then again, by their definition, there's all this material out there, and we can never think of it as material because we would have to perceive objective facts and we perceive subjective ones. Oh dear. So, can I make up a subjective definition? Well, I've given it several times, but it's always good to, focus when you choose the topic. Maybe you guys are not familiar with it, maybe you are. But the subjective definition for material is based on the idea that we get a stream of perceptions. We don't know which ones are sense perceptions. Or for that matter, a better way, we don't know how much any given perception is a mix of sense perceptions and past sense perceptions and relatively novel imagery from the mind. We don't know. And what we do is we look at the senses to see which ones have the more reliable qualities, which are related to consistency. So some of our senses are very consistent. Some of our senses relate. Some of our senses are, comply with principles of non-contradiction and identity and these kinds of basic ideas, sometimes called the metaphysics of physics. You know, and so material is whatever is making those consistent. Whatever. It doesn't matter because, see, the perceptions, which are subjective, have consistency. So I can say, I can throw a net of whatever, say, whatever's causing that. We're calling that materialism, and then we're going to look into it. And if you look, what would be a good test for a definition like that? Look at science. Well, science has a skeptical epistemology, and it looks into materialism based on subjective information, namely somebody's sense experiment. Okay, I'm getting a little bit tongue-tied because the point is it's through experiments, which means that it's through sense experience because that's how you read out an experiment is by using your senses. So, so that's your subjective definition of materialism. And the question is, well, is it any good? Does it do you any good? And I think it's pretty clear that it does do us pretty good. I mean, the physical sciences, based entirely on sense perceptions and um, you know, uh, theory seems to be working pretty well. We we have a giant body of knowledge, and some people could think that I've redefined the terms. No, I don't really think so. Ultimately, I mean, yeah, I am applying new definitions to words, but I'm not applying new extensions. The words still apply to the same thing. The same kind of thing is considered knowledge. But I've explained how it can be considered knowledge when it's not so perfect as we thought it had to be. And what we have here, is a situation where, I could go to the people that have no inkling about this version of knowledge and nature's process, and that the external world's really a network of relationships and not a flat space like we think. I could go to the people that totally reject that, but how far would I drag them in this direction? I find it far more interesting people that understand these ideas, like that last video. I find it far more interesting to me once somebody pictures that there are no things, only processes and networks of things, relationships, um, and in that sense, there are things, but all they are is nodes in networks. Once you see that, I don't understand why somebody would still be looking for an unchanging something upon which to pin identity. Once you know there is no unchanging anything, everything's changing, then why would you hold on to a criteria of identity that says you're looking for something that doesn't change? And so when you say that the river still does exist because the process, which is the river, exists. See, some people are like, well, that's an attempt to make a changing thing an unchanging thing by calling it the process. But they'll point out, the process is different. Every moment, the dirt is being moved around in that system. The weather's changing in that system that feeds water to the top of the river and to the head of the river, and has it go back down to the sea, and in this cycle that's constantly changing too. So you haven't really gotten by saying that there's a process there. So if the river is a process, and you still never step in the same river twice because the process is changing. But this is the whole point. Everything is changing. Yeah, the process is changing too, but its continual relationship to its previous self is what binds it. See, it's a system. Things are happening in the system. The system as a whole is interacting with the world around it, and it's changing. Yes, and everything is in flux and changing, and yet we can still identify these systems and these processes. And we can never separate these processes enough to say, well, the river really is a thing that's distinct from everything around it. No, the river has these blurry edges. It's like, well, the valley is sort of part of it, and the whole weather system is sort of a part of it. And at some point we get far enough away from the river, we know we're talking about something else, some other river or a mountain, right? But the disconnection we're taking is still always, our decision to make as cognitive beings. And we apply that to this pattern. And so, we have this idea of a complete system out there, but what we do is we filter out and try to look at little parts of the system at once. And that's what we call things. Okay, I wandered there at the end, but it is late. And I don't know why I'm making an excuse, but, whatever. Okay, bye.